Traditionally in HR, focus was on the individual rather than the broader picture. Those days are behind us. The best performing teams put people data at the heart of their HR decisions. While people analytics leaders and those implementing analytics initiatives currently tend to come from outside of HR, there is still a strong need for an HR background in order to understand all the processes as well as having the soft skills. Not everyone in HR needs to be a data analyst, of course, but they should be able to be a data consumer, data translator, and data storyteller. And that's what Chris Bjorling and I will be focusing on today. Our guest in episode 4 joined Protective Life to help them build data-driven capabilities in their HR department and take their performance to new levels. Matthew Hamilton is Head of HR Strategy and People Analytics at Protective Life.
Hey, Matthew, welcome to the show today. We're pleased to have you here. You started with an engineering background. How did you end up doing people analytics?
I kind of followed a non-standard career path, I think, but I think that's also not uncommon amongst people in the people analytics space, since it is emerging. But my path to what I'm doing, I actually started my career as a military officer. I flew helicopters in the Army for several years, and ended up getting out of the service and went back to grad school. And then I kind of floated between and worked in project management and aerospace and software, and ultimately found my way into the HR realm via the military background. I found my way into working for a Fortune 500 bank in the leadership development function, leveraging that military leadership experience. And then because I had an engineering degree, I got tapped internally to start building out the analytics capabilities within HR. It's sort of a joke, but not too far from the truth, that the conversation essentially said, well, you understand math and a lot of HR folks struggle with math, so come figure this out. So I did that for a few years, building out the people analytics capability in the bank, and then ultimately got recruited away to come to Protective Life. And it's kind of funny, if we had talked about 8 years ago, I would have swore to you that I would never work in HR, I'd never work for a bank, and I'd never work for an insurance company. And now I've checked off all 3 of those blocks to lead me to where I am today.
Hey, Matthew, you've spoken about the growing need for a shared language across HR. As part of that, why do you think it's important for HR to have data-driven and analytical skills?
The importance, I think, for HR professionals to be data-driven, to have some level of analytical skills. Not that we expect all HR professionals to be analysts, if you will, but I think it's important because of the nature of how HR has shifted. So if you think back, years or really decades ago, HR was a lot more focused on, acquiring in mass amounts of talent. Think, early, in mass production, and then a lot of focus on compliance-oriented things, a lot of focus on labor relations, but it evolved to where the idea of HR being the strategic partner to the business. And to me, at least, one sort of implied part of being strategic is that you have to come to the conversation with facts, data-based facts, so that you're not bringing just opinion into a conversation, just opinion and experience, but you're bringing actual factual information. And so that, I think, has really pushed the impetus for HR as an organization to be data-driven, to be fact-based, so that we can truly be strategic in how we're advising the business. Think, business leaders, they're used to consuming data on all kinds of things and how they run their business operations. So, why not for people also? And then sort of the importance for the individual in HR to be analytical and data driven there's lots of different research out there. One that I go back to is research that was done by Josh Bersin initially, where they were able to show the analytical or the data literacy competencies of all HR professionals, not just an analytics team within HR, but all HR professionals in an organization, had the biggest correlation to being the most mature organizations in terms of using that data. And if you think about it, if your analytics team within HR can create some great analytically driven insights, but the rest of the HR team doesn't have that data literacy to be able to understand and consume that, then ultimately you're going to have a challenge actually putting any of those insights to use. So that's why I think it's important that all HR professionals have some level of data-driven or analytical skills.
Well, that's brilliant. That's really fun. My mind has just been racing with everything you've been saying there because it's so exciting. Let me ask you a question, because I love how you started out in the earlier question saying, you understand math, HR people don't normally, and you kind of just back that up with the study that you referenced for that. So quick question for you here, kind of a coin flip moment. Do you believe data analysis skills are more important than traditional HR knowledge?
So as the analytics guy in HR answering this, might give you a counterintuitive answer, but I'd actually say, no, they're not more important than traditional HR knowledge. What I think is actually important is to have both, or just have some degree of both, as much as we can in ourselves as individual HR practitioners, but then especially within your HR team, within the broader HR organization. And I'll give you an example. I actually wrote an article on LinkedIn recently about this, but using an example that I've used with the teams that I work with for years now. What I do is when working with the teams, I will put up, or what I'll do is I'll tell them, I'm going to show you an image. I'm going to show you a picture, and I want you to write down just the one word that comes to mind to describe what you're seeing, and 1 or 2 words. And so then I put an image up, and it's this beautiful picture of I don't know what kind, but redwood trees, some kind of trees, sunlit, shining through them. And then I kind of give the description of the history of HR. But what I ultimately lead to talk with them about this is about 60% of the time people write down tree or trees, and then about 20 to 30% of the time people write down forest. And then you have those 10% of people who write down something completely different. But what I use that as a vehicle to talk about is the mindset of people in HR when the ones who say tree or trees, they tend to be the kind of people who focus on the individual. The kind of person who answers forest tends to be the kind of person who focuses on the big picture of things, looking at aggregate at big patterns and trends, but not overly focused on the individual. And then that 10% of people who say something like peace or transcendence or something, those are the creative thinkers who think outside the box and they approach the question entirely differently. And previously, I would use that as a vehicle to say, you need to be saying forest. You need to be thinking bigger picture trend, because if not, you're too focused on the individual. But when I was actually writing this into an article for LinkedIn, it made me kind of step back and think about it. And I said, actually, no, the right answer is all of the above are correct answers to what describes this image you're seeing. And in a team, in an HR team, you actually need all of those answers. If everybody had the broad view and focused on the big picture, and nobody did focus on the individual level, you'd have a problem actually. If you didn't have those 10% of people who gave you out of the box crazy answers, you're not going to ever have creative solutions to anything because everybody's thinking inside the box. So, so to go back to your question, are data and analysis skills important? Yes, they are important. Are they more important than traditional HR knowledge? No, I think they're all important, and we need to have a good mix of those amongst our teams.
I love your answer. That is wonderful. Yeah, it's kind of like, you have to see all of the picture. I think that is where your reference is going, that, those 3 components that you looked at from the statistical standpoint represent the whole picture. And that's the cool thing. And I love that. So let me shift gears a little bit and ask you this: as the head of HR strategy and people analytics at Protective Life, for you, what are the 3 most important metrics you look at when assessing employee and team performance?
Yeah, so that's a very broad question, right? There's a lot of things we can look at. What I would say is, beyond just me and my company, I would say for any HR leader or HR analytics leader, what are the things they should be looking at? And the answer is really, it depends. It depends on what's your business, what's your strategy, what's going on right now, right? The most important metrics, they shouldn't stay the same over time. They should evolve as the situation's changing. Obviously, right now with being everything impacts because of COVID, the things that we should be paying attention to for team performance probably are different than what they were pre-pandemic. So that they need to evolve. So I'll kind of answer this from, what are 3 things that I'm really paying attention to right now? But, if a listener's listening to this, 3 months after we've recorded, they may be different by that point. But some of the things I'm paying attention to right now is retention, but particularly the resignation rate that people are leaving the company at, and particularly I'm focused on our high and mid performers. So basically our employees who are stellar performers, and then our solid bedrock of employees. We probably not dissimilar to other companies have seen that resignation rate depressed because of the pandemic. The job market's kind of froze up a lot. But now that vaccines are getting out and things are in, more or less in different places, but are starting to move towards returning to normal. I wouldn't say they're back to normal yet. People are expecting job mobility, and you can find this in the press. I saw a recent article on CNBC said 1 in 4 workers is planning to quit their job or thinking about quitting their job after the pandemic. Obviously, if that happened to all of us, that would be a major impact. So paying attention to the resignation rate of our employees so that we can stay on top of it and not let that catch up on us is one important thing, because if you're losing all your high performers, it's hard to deliver business performance, if you will. Another one that's started paying a lot of attention to is around our use of time off, and not just the volume of the usage of our time off, but how long it's been since employees have taken time off, so that we can start to focus on both at a high, top line level for the company, but then also getting down into specific leaders to understand where we might have problems that employees, in aggregate are stretching the average time that it's been since they've taken time off too long. So it's important to be, using that time off for rest and recovery throughout the year. If you've gone 8, 12, 16 weeks without taking a day off, you might have some people who are really prone to burnout. So we're trying to focus both at the organizational level, but then also at the individual level to find where we have either teams where there may be a systemic problem with people not taking enough time off, or individuals where individuals have stretched it out too long, and their manager may need to have a conversation with them to say, you need to take a day off and relax. And then I guess the third one that is pretty broad that we're focusing a lot on is in the diversity and inclusion space. So a lot of metrics within there that we can measure, in particular, just focusing on things and how they break down to groups of employees, underrepresented groups. So paying attention to minorities and females, and ensuring that we're creating good career paths for them, both bringing them into the organization, but creating career paths for them to move up in the organization, to not get stuck at, everybody's familiar with the idea of the glass ceiling, but also there's some terminology put, I think it was McKinsey who put out the term the broken rung. So the ladder, moving up the ladder, where do we have the broken rung, if you will, where we have employee representation of minorities and females drops off at different levels. So how can we keep moving that up to create the pipeline so that we can have diverse leadership, not just now, but in the future?
Matthew, we are coming towards the end of this interview already. I've just got one more question for you before I then throw it back to Chris. And it's one that we like to ask all of our guests, and I think it's particularly relevant for you today, given the two sides of the coin that we've spoken about, the human side and the data side. As we look to wrap up, we like to ask the following: from a culture and people processes perspective, what does a high performing company mean to you?
So I think for a high performing company, it really means that they're an organization that is delivering on or meeting the expectations of all their stakeholders. As an HR professional, it can be too easy to focus just on the employee, for example, or just on the candidate, for example, if you're in the talent acquisition space. But I think it is important to understand and meet the expectations of all the stakeholders. So that means, if you are a public company, your shareholders, so your shareholders, your customers. Without satisfying your shareholders and your customers, you're not going to have a company for too long if you can't do that well. But then also meeting the needs and expectations of your employees, and with the employees, I would lump candidates for jobs, even if you haven't hired them yet. And then your communities, the communities that organizations operate in. Like, you have to fit and be an active member of the community, I think, to have that long-term potential and really be truly high performing.
Matthew, thank you so much for everything you've been giving us today during this podcast. It's exciting to hear all of your thoughts and your ideas. It's wonderful to take your engineering world and break it into the current modern concept of analytics in the HR world. And I loved all of the examples you gave, stories you told, clear, spot on. So here's a question that we want to ask you. How can we learn more?
So for me personally, LinkedIn, that's the social platform that I'm on. So I think I'm just Matthew R. Hamilton is my extension on LinkedIn. And I've been this year, I've been trying to make a conscious effort to take more of my thoughts and put them down in written form and put those out. So I've been trying to publish weekly. So you can follow me on LinkedIn to get that written content. And then my company, Protective Life, is just protective.com.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
This podcast is supported by Fidello Inc., a consulting firm specializing in improving human performance. Through their products and services, Fidello helps clients design, develop, and implement strategic integrated human resource processes and systems. Learn more at fidello.com. That's FIDELLO.com.